Hello and welcome to this Philosophy Sunday video. And this video is going to be called High Art versus Low Art and Why Chas and Dave are the greatest British band of all time. A long title, not the sort of thing which is good on YouTube, because YouTube you got to grab people's attention. And so I might have to have that as the main title, and then the thumbnail might have to be short and sweet. And we can go into trying to think what sort of short and pithy statement could I put on that will draw people to watch this video, but also relates to the topic in hand. I haven't got anything at the moment, but if you have clicked on this because of the thumbnail, then that worked. And this is the great tension between high art and low art, between that which is popular and grabs people and titillates, and that which makes great statements which are, you know, profound and beautiful or ugly or whatever it is that art does so well. We're going to try and deal with that on this video, but I am really going to be going back to a thing that happens in popular music, which is much maligned, and I think it shouldn't be maligned, and is an area of music that I want to bring into the remit of this channel. And that is the idea of the novelty song. I think the novelty song is one of the highest art forms there is, precisely because it operates within a realm where the sort of elites, the sophisticated, the art and music critics, they are not interested in even treating this stuff as art. And the only way you can have real art is when people think there's no art there whatsoever. It's very interesting, this is, and this dichotomy is what's going to be explored on this video. Now, if I talk about my sort of personal history as being an English person of a certain age, I could start to now mention things that all British people will know, which I think the people in the rest of the world won't know. And I'm pretty sure Chas and Dave will be an example of that, because Chas and Dave, what they do, it's very difficult for them to transmit what they do to the rest of the world because it's so English. It's so English. But when you start to examine what they do, it starts to become a lot more interesting, in a way, profound. So there are novelty songs that are just rubbish songs, okay? They are simple, and there's some artistic worth there in examining those. But there's other people who make novelty songs where I believe it's as high art as anything else, and they are auteurs at it, and they have refined what they do. And I would say Chas and Dave are in that bracket. They didn't make one novelty song. They almost had a whole career that went on for decades making novelty songs. They continually got in the charts. And their music can be very funny at times, very entertaining, but also there's moments where it can be very succinct and profound. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think there's a reason why Chas and Dave were able to do that. So I am going to utilize Chas and Dave on this channel as an emblem of novelty, an emblem of Englishness, and an emblem of the summation of 20th century popular music. That I'm really putting a big thing on Chas and Dave's shoulders. Something that I don't think anybody has ever done before. Should there be video after video examining Chas and Dave in the same way as we do the Beatles? Well, the Beatles are often not that far away from Chas and Dave. It's interesting that they could do a song like, you know, Maxwell's Silver Hammer or Yellow Submarine, which can be seen as even more trite and novelty-like than Chas and Dave, right? And with that, the pioneering aspects that Chas and Dave bring to the music. This video, I'm going to try and do two things. I'm going to try and explain the difference between high art and low art, how they relate, how they don't relate. But I also want to get into the wonder and brilliance of Chas and Dave. So for all of those of you who aren't British, I'm going to now play you a little bit of Chas and Dave. This is one of their most famous songs, and it's called Rabbit.
Rabbit, 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 rabbit. You got a beautiful chin. You got beautiful skin. You got a beautiful face. You got taste. You got beautiful eyes. You got beautiful thighs. You got a lot without a doubt, but I'm thinking about blowing you out. 'Cause you won't stop talking. Why don't you give it a rest? You got more rabbit than Sainsbury's. It's time you got it off your chest. Now you was just the kind of girl to break my heart in two. I knew right off when I first kept my eyes on you. But how was I to know you'd been my heroes too? With your incessant talking, you're becoming a pest. Rabbit, 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 rabbit. Now you're a wonderful girl.
So, high art and low art. We've all seen Amadeus. He said, I've not seen Amadeus, Andy. All right then, some of us have seen Amadeus. And Amadeus is about a young Mozart. Well, say young Mozart because he was young when he died, wasn't he? Mozart is this little genius, and in the court of the king that he's doing stuff for, there's this much older composer called Salieri, and Salieri is high art establishment composer, but he hasn't got the genius of Mozart, and he gets very upset by this, and he then decides to get Mozart to write a requiem, which will be the greatest piece of music while killing him. It's a very artsy-fartsy film, and Amadeus is one of those films that reeks of being artsy-fartsy. It cleared up a whole ton of Oscars, and the reason is because it's in historical costume, it's dealing with Mozart's high art before you even start. Mozart can be seen as being high art, and part of the tension in Amadeus is the fact that when we watch the film, Mozart is a bit of an idiot, he's a bit childish, he's a bit petulant. We like that dichotomy, but out of it comes all this brilliant innate genius. We love innate geniuses. Innate geniuses. That's got nothing to do with high art. It smacks of authenticity. Someone who's just so brilliant that everything they touch is wonderful. And the establishment elites are so sophisticated that this new innovative genius who's just innate, they are able to appreciate, they can herald it across the world. This person's a genius. Now, obviously, if you were a musician at Mozart's time, you could either sit down in your local tavern and play a bunch of folk songs and maybe pick up a few pennies here and there, but you probably wouldn't have classed yourself as a musician. Now, the only way you could become a professional musician was to attach yourself to some sort of church or court. And so the elite establishment create the idea of fine art, right? It operates very much like popular music does in the 20th century, in that you write tunes, and if they're a hit with the king or the church or whatever it is, then they're a hit. It's a small section of society that are hearing this stuff, and so it would only be the elites really that know about Handel or Mozart, unless it's performed at some great big sort of royal ceremony. And in that case, even then, as a percentage of the population of that country, it would be infinitesimal people that would have heard that music, if they could have heard it at all, without, big PAs and amplifiers and all that type of stuff. That's yet to come. Art in itself is local up until the 20th century. If we look at painting, there's a long history of painting, but if we take it up at sort of Western European religious painting, we have lots of cathedrals, and in there's lots of paintings of biblical scenes, and at the center of it will be Christ's crucifixion. And someone walking into that cathedral, not the king, not the elites, but someone normal would walk into there and see riches, colors, shapes beyond their wildest dreams. It would be like dropping LSD for a peasant to walk into a cathedral in the 1700s. And amongst all the incredible bright colours as the sun shines in through the stained glass windows, reds and blues, which they probably have never seen before in that way, is a painting at the centre of Jesus Christ, and he is suffering. He is suffering for our sins, and it is the awareness of that suffering within the hoi polloi, which is the thing on which Christianity is structured. And so in Western art, we start to look into old Greek ideas of art in terms of anatomy, perspective, and we slowly start to develop a way of seeing the world. Now, European art invents this thing called perspective. And perspective is interesting because it suggests a certain type of viewpoint, a subjective viewpoint of the world, which brings the world into an objective, vista, a panorama. And perspective is used to create an embodiment of the suffering on Christ, because it's placed in the church, and perspective draws us in. It's like we're looking through a window, not seeing something that's decorative on the walls, like my semi-abstract paintings behind me. They existed themselves. Now, perspective makes you imagine that there's a sort of window in the wall, and you're seeing a scene, and then oil paint allowed painters to get a lot more structure and strength into the painting, so they could then show the suffering, they could show the thorns going into the head, they could show the strain, they could study the sort of musculature of human beings, which meant, getting dead bodies and hanging them up and studying it. And this studying to try and embody the crucifixion, or simply to, get a photographic likeness of an aristocrat, even though we have no idea of photography, again, to create the illusion that that person's in the room with you, creating immortality for a short while, at least for the person who's painted, but immortality to the great painters who could really do that for centuries. Art acting in that respect. The Renaissance, which is where we see these things developed, leads to the Enlightenment. It gives us another idea of truth, and truth has a lot to do with our perspective. These ideas are what we would call high art ideas. At the same time, in every tavern, people are still singing songs about, sailors that went off, to sea and got venereal disease or whatever they're thinking about. And are they doing the same thing now? They're acting in a different way altogether, aren't they? They're just sort of telling stories. People are nodding their head along. It's like much more communitarian, and it's a different thing. It's a different thing to the high art, which is really relates to salvation, doesn't it, if you think about it? These techniques that we associate with high art, they lead to salvation, but they also lead to the rise of the individual. That's something that comes out of Enlightenment thinking. And by the time we get to the Romantic period in the 19th century, we have this profound idea of the sublime, but not linked to religion. That's a big jump. Beethoven does it. Mozart's on the cusp of doing it. Bach doesn't do it. Bach is revealing the beauty of God's world. Mozart, he comes steaming in with his personality. It's about him. Beethoven, it's even more about him. And so we get to a situation in the 19th century where the art forms of high art's been delineated. It's got this power, but it's not being used for religious reasons. It's not being used for salvation. I think the idea of high art comes from the idea of piety and salvation and the truth of the word of God embodied in Christianity. That's what I think we equate it to. And we bring a sort of hush reverence to art, and we treat it almost like it's a religious icon when we feel it's got those attributes. But post-Enlightenment and post-Industrial Revolution, those things, those techniques of art are utilised for secular reasons. Some of the most important paintings in the 19th century are paintings of animals, cows, horses. People would travel a long way and, get a hotel to then walk into an art gallery somewhere and queue up so that they could look at some big fat cow. The big fat cow syndrome, I think, is key to 20th century art because it's the beginning of a crossover. All these techniques of high art are now being utilised to create something which chimes with just the regular person in the street. You know, we get newspapers, we get stories. Charles Dickens emerges a bit later on. We get Sherlock Holmes. People are getting involved in a world out there, and it is expanding with the nature of technology. We get to the 20th century, and the 20th century, we suddenly see the fruits of the industrial relation, almost like it's the move from steam to electricity, and fossil fuels. I would say probably steam, fossil fuels, and electricity. Now, those sorts of technologies, these sort of spirits in the machine that motivate stuff, you know, we've always seen ourselves as being reflected in those things. Sigmund Freud's idea of the subconscious bursting forth is a little bit like a non-functioning steam engine, and all the steam's building up and it's about to blow. You know, when people get angry, they blow a gasket because we think of that anger as in this sort of pressure system of the steam engine. And then petrol comes in, and petrol's got a lot more power. It's got a lot more horsepower. We're not under the sort of constraints of a steam power, which is usually put in the responsibility of one person. There's very few people that were like driving steam trains around in the Victorian era. You just sat there, you know, being towed there by someone else. But then when cars come out, we get this idea of control ourselves. We've got access to power beyond our normal humanity. You know, we can now travel long distances, travel at high speed. You know, we can lift great things. Personal power comes in. It is no coincidence that a lot of the early blues, rhythm and blues, is based upon the sound of the steam train, and that a lot of rock and roll then transplants that into the idea of freedom embodied within the car. The steam train is the great modernist symbol. It's about expansionism. It's about people being able to go to new areas and new places and travel there and arrive there. It's about the expansion into America. The car is about young people gaining freedom through this incredible device. Electricity comes in. Electricity is much more wide into how the brain works, and we start to see the brain as being some almost like Frankenstein aspects. The life source is electric, and we see that embodied in sort of the electric guitar and film and cinema and light, and all these things start to come together. When you go to see a rock concert, you don't just go to watch the rock concert and watch the people perform and listen to it. You go to see the light show. The light show is replicating a religious experience. Suddenly our superstars are lit up on a cinema screen. They glow like other beings, like spiritual beings, or they're on stage coming out of smoke as though they're coming down from the doors of Mount Olympus to see us. The 20th century sees the emergence of popular art. It's so unbelievably powerful that where do the elites go? What do the kings and the poshies and the aristocrats do? Well, what they do is they create the idea of modern art. And modern art is, and they don't create it, they fall into the trap of it. Modern art is something that only they understand. And why do they understand it? Because they're the elite. And why is it only the elites that understand it? Because they buy it. When people are perturbed by someone taping a banana to a wall, right, and then some billionaire buying it for millions and then eating that banana, it's because they don't want to see the meaning of that art, which is as plain as a banana stuck to a wall. You know, bananas have all sorts of meaning in our culture. All sorts of meanings, and one of them is something that you slip up on. The idea that, you know, the art's tricked you, that the art's a lie, that the person who's bought this has been tricked into it. The art becomes worth millions because the elites decided it was worth millions, and in doing that, the artist is able to scoop £1 million out of nothing just by an act so small that you go, what did they actually do? They got some gaffer tape or duct tape, depending on what you call it, and they taped a banana to a wall. My God, that took a few seconds. Yeah, but it's worth this. Why is it worth this? Because it's self-referential. The elites go to these things and they go around and they act like they're in a special club, and they are divorced from all the popular forms of art. And once you divorce that high art away from it, the popular forms can sit there and just be popular. Okay? So we have a trajectory in the arts. When the Gutenberg press was invented, we could now create Bibles on sort of a mass level. And so the ownership of what the Bible had to say was no longer in the hands of the priest. They could then get translated out of Latin as well, so normal people could read them. People could learn to read them as well, so then they've got their own power. There's a power in having a family Bible. But of course, once the Bible's created, then we have the idea of the novel. And the novel emerges at the end of the Renaissance, beginning of Enlightenment. And the great novels start off really in the realm of pornographic titillation. Any new technology that can be utilized to create art usually starts with pornographic titillation. Once that's established, then another realm emerges. The way that the pornography, which is a little bit, and I hate to say this because it sounds so blasphemous, but you have to understand where I'm coming from. The reality in the utilization of high art techniques to embody the suffering of Christ can also be utilized to mimic the experience of being involved in some sort of sexual experience. I used the word experience twice then, sorry. That will be hand in hand in the technology, right? The technology will always be being utilized to try and create that experience. And that is where usually things are negotiated in terms of what that new technology has got to offer. Okay? So the descriptive language we see in the novel and the titillation of a story of, say, a young girl getting tempted and pulled away and going on fun adventures, the adventures of Mole Flanders or whoever it is, these sorts of ideas are the testing ground for what this new technology can do in terms of aesthetics. And so what we have to understand is that the popular music that we celebrate on this channel, and we try and tell the story of that popular music, we have to understand that every single thing we are discussing starts in the realm of novelty. And because novelty is aligned to sort of pornography, it is seen as such. It seems as though it's low in its artistic remit. And in the 20th century, after the emergence of really conceptual arts, which comes out of the destruction of salon painting, the salon painting being this modernist idea that we know what art is and these are the rules, and you go to a salon and people are going to be judged. Can you get into the Royal Academy by doing this painting and all that type of thing? That goes. And that journey from, you know, the emergence of the Cubists through to Marcel Duchamp's fountain, the urinal that you stuck in an art gallery, that's a short journey. And once that happens and we have the idea of conceptual art, which emerges way before the term conceptual arts comes out. Now, the idea of conceptual art is going to be so powerful when it comes to the establishment of high art within rock and roll and rock music, but we have to get there, don't we? So where are we now? So we've got the 20th century. Now, for music, which I now want to concentrate on more, the great revolution in music is the invention of recording. Recordings invented around about 1860, something like 1867. Right, so unlike film and photography, the application for pornography from sound, there's not that much there, is there? Really, you know. And so the idea that novelty music's going to emerge much faster than, say, the sort of what the Butler saw, stuff that emerges almost straight out of photography and film. You know, as soon as photography is invented, they've invented those things that you get your hand on, turn around, and it's just still photographs and it clicks, and it's what the Butler saw, titillation. Thomas Edison, that had invented recording, he wanted it to go the same route that he saw cinema should go in, which is basically the recordings would exist in a space like a church, and there would be somebody at the front in control of it, Thomas Edison, and you would go in and pay and sit and listen to the recording in the room. But people fought against that because the another way of doing it was which was much more democratic, is for people to be able to have the recordings in the house and control over them themselves. Once you start to look at the history, you start to see this wrangle going on. When it comes to actual electricity, you've got Tesla, who wanted electricity to just be available to the people for free. And then there was like Edison, who wanted to control it, you know, and make a light bulb that would only last a few months, and then it would blow up and you'd have to buy a new one. It's all about economics. That's where they're coming from. Recording is invented in the 1860s. Obviously, the first thing that's ever recorded is someone speaking, someone saying Mary had a little lamb. Then they've got to have the realization that they can record music on it. That has to, you know, people wouldn't think that straight away. You know, they've just invented recording, so they're recording themselves. They might record the cat and the dog. Oh, this is cool, isn't it? Oh, we can record some music. Oh my God. And that means we can transmit the feeling that music gets you. We now can transmit it from here, where it's only in the room, in that sort of controlled church-like environment where you have to go to somewhere and sit and someone performs at you directly, you're not control. Now we can take it, you can sit at home and you can have it anytime you like. You can have that feeling, you know, pack it up on some sort of cylinder recording and you can take it home and have it. Oh, well, what's the best sort of music? I don't know, opera, light opera, a bit of classical music, some piano music. We can't really record orchestras, but we can record this. Singing's good, isn't it? Because, you know, we can hear the voice. It's good to hear the human voice. So this is how recording emerges. Now, what shocks me is that whilst this is going on, in America, we are getting the fact that a new country that is emerging and is becoming powerful and technologically able, but has also got a huge amount of different people swimming around in it. And these people have been violently, like, you know, if you've got like trying to get a chemical reaction, you might have to shake it up. And America's shaken that up because it's not just lots of different people getting on. You've got slavery. We've got the bringing in of African Americans. We've got the Civil War with the violence that's approached with that. And then we got the negotiation of what it is to be black in America. All this is going on, almost like the invention of recording happens with the end of the Civil War. Think about that. Think about that recording's there. Black people are being emancipated to somewhat, and that wrangle's going on the whole time that recording exists. Does anybody record the music that's coming out of that, from the minstrelsy or the marching bands in New Orleans? No, nobody records it. They don't record it. Well, surely when we get into the 20th century, and it's been there for like 40 years, they're going to start recording some of this folk music. No, they don't record it. They just don't record it. They don't record it. They don't record any jazz or any blues till 1917, when they record the original Dixieland Jazz Band. Right? And that opens the door to this new folk music that America has. Right? All the other countries have got folk music, and believe me, they've been recording all of it. You know, Bela Bartok was out in Hungary recording all sorts of different folk music in Hungary. Right? But no one was recording jazz. But as soon as they did, what had been negotiated in America was this incredible novelty music. It had ferocious rhythms, it had chaotic melodies, sound effects, and utilized the nature of the recording to create something that you can't quite do in a concert hall. And it suddenly blows up. There would be no music industry if they'd have only gone around recording Caruso and all those, because Caruso was selling millions of cylinders and then 78s at the beginning of the 20th century. The music business was established by the time original Dixieland Jazz Band are recorded, right? And they're recorded because it's seen as a novelty song. They arrive in New York. They happen to be near a recording studio. There's a company there that put out novelty records. And they think, oh, they've got this tune, Livery Stable Blues, which is, you know, all these farmyard sounds. That could be a great novelty recording. It is a novelty recording. It's put out. People love it more than the novelty. They've pioneered something. No one's looking. Now, I've argued on here that jazz isn't black music. The reason I argue it is because to understand jazz, you have to understand it's not black music. Black people are really, really involved in it. They're like the X Factor. The African-American experience of slavery and then emancipation, then Jim Crow, and all the negotiation that goes on, and the difference between the South and the North, and the idea that of being emancipated and moving north, right? We know about Louis Armstrong and the original Dixieland Jazz Band, not because they were in New Orleans, it's because they moved north. This is really, really important. This is the shaky thing that you get together. The idea that it comes from some sort of black gene of black music and that's come through it, and any other influence in the music is arbitrary, it doesn't count, is basically massively racist. You know, it's like elevating what black people do as being higher than what anyone else does. And believe me, those people who champion this think that that's the case. You know, it's not our fault that us black people are so talented that we just have this stuff pouring out of themselves. And they buy into that trope, which is massively racist against them. Now, black people are exactly the same as everybody else. And most people are really bloody rubbish when it comes to the arts, but there are the odd few geniuses in there. Because nobody's looking. If you understand why popular music emerges, the reason is because nobody's looking at it. At precisely the time that they are recording the original Dixieland Jazz Band in 1917, America has got to a point technologically and industrially and commercially where they now want their own culture. They want their own painters. They want their own poets. They've got the great poet, Walt Whitman, you know. There's the great painters emerging. And eventually, I would say Edward Hopper would be one of the first great American painters. Aaron Copland is trying to utilize what he sees as American folk music, and he's trying to utilize it in a classical form, as is George Gershwin. They're white guys working in the white realm of classical music, right? But what do the black geniuses do? If you're a black genius in 1915, where can you go? You can't go to the world of classical music. You won't be let in. The only way of you getting any fame is actually working in the realm of blackface. The first superstar black composers were working in that realm, right? Or working in the realm of marching music. I mean, we have to say Scott Joplin and W.C. Handy, two black composers, are like key to the development of jazz, but it's not jazz. And they were both held back in their vision of creating a sort of black classical music. No, jazz wasn't black classical music. It was novelty music. It was silly music. And a whole bunch of musicians are attracted to it of all sorts of races, but the white guys that are coming to it, like Jelly Roll Morton and Vic Spiderbeck, they are basically almost like betraying their race, you know, and their parents aren't happy with it. And, you know, they are seen themselves as slumming it. You know, great musicians are seen as slumming it. If you're white, why would you want to, you know, be involved in that? Now, a lot of people shout at me that Jelly Roll Morton wasn't white. No, he wasn't white, but he wasn't black either. It's that complex. It's more complex than what I'm saying. So, into this space, which is not a black space, which is a space of novelty, where all this mad stuff's going on, right? The word jazz is applied to, but actually it's mad marching music, piano music, boogie-woogie, very sophisticated music like James Europe's, you know, very, you know, almost like classical influenced marching music. It's all this stuff's bubbling around, but it's the fact that it's a low art that allows black geniuses to come in. And throughout the 1920s, when that sort of awareness of blackness emerges, this is where the idea of blackness emerges. To say it's back in New Orleans in the 1890s is to not understand. If you're going to talk about your history, and I think it's all of our history, because I just think there's human beings, but that's me. But if you want to talk about your history, get your history right. Black genius and black expertise emerges in the 1920s. And suddenly you have geniuses emerging which cannot be questioned. It's in the 1920s that the establishment elites, usually those that are not in America but out in other countries like France, start to hear people like Louis Armstrong or Fletcher Henderson, you know, and they start to go, oh my God, this is genius. King Oliver wasn't a genius. He was a great trumpeter and he had a great New Orleans band, but he wasn't a genius. By the time he brought Louis Armstrong in, he was brought in because he needed another trumpet player. No New Orleans band had two trumpet players. Right, I'm getting ensconced into the history of jazz here, and I need to move forward. And this is the problem with identity politics, because it stumps the discussion. I wish I could just say this and move on. So, the discovery of, let's call it American novelty music in the 1920s ignites the recorded music industry. And out of that, a whole bunch of things emerge. It's immensely important. All these different ideas come together. And by the time we get to the 1930s, jazz has changed completely. The rhythmical structure and the sort of arrangement structures have changed. New Orleans jazz doesn't sound like the sort of quarter note swing of Count Basie. 10 years, it's completely changed. That's another thing about the history of jazz that nobody wants to take on board. Where did that rhythm come from? Where did that rhythm come from in the 1920s? Where does that come? Why does it change? And that change suddenly creates something that grooves, it's powerful. You've got a whole bunch of elements. You've got the syncopation of marching music, but you've also got the emergence of the drum kit and the rhythm section that happens with swing, you know, the bass, drums, piano. You've got the sort of drive of boogie-woogie piano players who are also making records. You've got the blues. There's a whole bunch of things here that emerge. But as I've studied this, I've become more and more aware that actually we are going back to something that was around in the 19th century. When we start to explore this, there is something of the sort of, how can I put this? There is a virtuosity that we see in somebody like Sidney Bechet. And this is the racial aspect of it. Black musicians who could play, or well, Creole musicians to be more accurate, that could play classical music in the 1870s and 1880s could no longer do that in the 1890s. And I'm afraid it's the sophistication of European concert music that is brought into the realm of American folk music that creates genius improvisers that are improvising at a high level. Sidney Bechet being the first one, Louis Armstrong being the next one. There's that aspect of it, but there is also an aspect of the do-it-yourself. This is often associated with novelty music. You can make your own instruments. You can sit there, you know, build a pretend bass, make some percussion instruments. And this really is also happening in New Orleans, and it gets lost. And the reason is because those bands were white. The Spasm bands were white. You know, I think it was Eugene Chadbourne, was it? Is that the guy? Eugene? No, it wasn't that. Anyway, these are... You have a situation in New Orleans that nobody wants to acknowledge. James Europe is a black musician. He's highly trained. He's highly sophisticated, like W.C. Handy. He's running an incredible orchestra. He's writing stuff that's influenced by Sousa in the beginning of the 20th century, pre-jazz, which is in like 5/8 and stuff like this, really sophisticated. Sidney Bechet is improvising at a level which is coming out directly of sort of Italian and French clarinet technique. And makes it high, but at the same time, we have the Spasm bands basically building their own instruments and trying to ape this sort of jazz, if you want to call it. Right back in the 1890s, on the streets, they're busking. Out of that becomes something that is then discovered once we start recording stuff. And when you start recording stuff, the record companies go, this jazz is great. And I love this urban blues, you know, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Leroy Carr. That's all great. We love that. Is there anything else? And they go start looking. And that history of the sort of busking musician, you know, which is another aspect. This is really low. You know, we have them everywhere. Every country's got someone, you know, standing on a street corner with a battered instrument, trying to do something that will get the pennies to drop in their pot. And at that time, this history, which is now created this sort of American folk music, which I think is the best name for jazz, would be American folk music. I can remember once when I was playing with Robert Plant, we did a gig at the Cambridge Folk Festival, and we opened up with a James Brown tune. And Robert said, yes, that was Think by the great American folk musician James Brown, and it got a laugh. But assure he wasn't lying. It's American folk music, and within that, this is so. I could get stuck here. I need to move on to get to Chaz and Dave. You're thinking, what's Chaz and Dave got to do with this? Well, all these ideas that pass through you know, the spasm bands through to people like Leadbelly that's discovered in a prison in the 1930s, or the recordings of Charlie Patton, or the recordings of Blind Lemon Jefferson. And I'm pretty sure that those buskers, when the white music business came their way and said, we want to record you, and they go, why? Well, this blues thing or this jazz thing is really good. They went, okay, then I'll give you that. I sing some of those songs. But when we discovered Leadbelly, we realised he was also singing nursery rhymes, children's songs, folk music that seemed much more close to English folk music. It was a whole remit of stuff going on. The Bristol recordings in 1927, when they record Jimmy Rogers and the Carter Family, really heralding the idea of country music, and then country and western music, which is a fusing of, you know, rhythm and blues, the rhythm and blues rhythm section with country folk songs. Same thing happens with church music, with gospel. That goes back to the sort of plantation songs of the blues. This all swilling around, and the recording industry is treating all of these as novelties. People will like this. They don't care whether it's high art, and within that, geniuses are stepping in. And there is a lineage of music. Now, here in the UK, something really interesting happens. What people don't understand is that jazz escapes the bottle in 1917 with the original Dixieland Jazz Band. They go around the world. By the time they get to the 1920s, they're here in Great Britain doing gigs. Jazz is out. We have a jazz scene in the United Kingdom that's been completely ignored. That was making records and was out there, and people were going to listen to jazz. By the mid-1920s, we're talking about 2 or 3 years after jazz emerged, we have a British jazz scene. And of course, because this is total novelty. This is the general public going, I love this jazz. And when they say jazz, they don't mean what we mean by jazz. This is, you know, dangerous, low music that's got rhythms and beats. It's sexual, it's primeval. This is what they're saying when they love jazz. And so British bands start to emulate that. But when you're a British band emulating it, it's a pastiche. Now, this has become a really bad thing because of cultural appropriation, but from a commercial point of view, this is going to happen. So now you've got British musicians go through British music training, listening to records by Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton, and trying to copy them and creating a British jazz scene here, which has been completely ignored. It doesn't really reach the public consciousness till after the Second World War. If you read Humphrey Lyttelton's autobiography, there's a thing that really sticks through my mind, that he was a budding trumpet player. When we won the war, we had a thing called VE Day, where everyone went on the streets and everyone was kissing each other and celebrating all night. Humphrey Lyttelton takes his trumpet out into the streets, and that sound of jazz, that sound of America, becomes the sound of freedom and the sound of victory. And so we get the emergence in the UK in the late 40s of this trad jazz scene. And these people, there's a difference. Where you have the beboppers in jazz in the 1940s turning jazz into a sophisticated form of music, high art music, they want a piece of that, you know, high art. They want to be liked by the kings and the establishment. That's where they're going for it. But they're not going to do it by accessing that. They're going to create their own establishment with its own language. They're going to dress smart. They're going to have their own. This is the creation of a black establishment, you know, and we see that go through to hip hop, you know. And it almost parodies, in going right back to the cakewalk in American music, it almost parodies, you know, the idea of the aristocracy, of the wealthy, of the elites. That becomes, in the 1940s, I believe, it's probably there before in the blues, but it becomes a very powerful thing within American black music, which now is a thing and contains more than just jazz. It's got a whole bunch of stuff attached to it by this point. And the reason why it's there is because of individual black genius musicians. Leadbelly is one of those, discovered by the whites, promoted forth. It goes around the world. And the British trad musicians are not like Louis Armstrong. They're not breaking down new barriers. What they're trying to do is play the music as accurate as it possibly could. And this is where novelty becomes like technical. How do they do that? How does Louis Armstrong do that? You've got to have a thing like this. Your drums have got to be played like this. You have to have the snare drum like this. Your double bass, you've got to do this. And everybody gets into emulation. Novelty always turns into that point where it's emulation. And with emulation becomes theory. Theory in music is how to do something that someone else has done. It's the language of cliche. So novelty then starts to get nailed. And with that, it becomes very sophisticated, and people start to say this is how you should do it. Here in the UK in the late 40s, Chris Barber has got a banjo player called Lonnie Donegan. They turned around to him and said, you know, this sort of American, you know, black music that we're aping, you know, people love it. Why don't we get into the sort of the more folk end, the more lead belly end? So he does this, and he invokes the spirit of those white spasm bands working on the streets of New Orleans in the 1880s and 1890s. He invokes that, and we have the skiffle boom. And the skiffle boom brings forth a whole bunch of musical influences, and a whole bunch of British people take on those influences. The early musicians that were playing skiffle, like Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and the guys from The Who, Eric Clapton, all the Beatles, all those people who were playing skiffle, what they were doing, they were playing novelty songs, right? Lonnie Donegan's great big hit was, you know, why does my chewing gum lose its flavour on the bedpost overnight? Right? These are novelty songs. It's that bit that in the UK, suddenly these artists are huge because they're going to number one because they're simple novelty songs. My Old Man's a Dustman.
My old man's a dustman, he wears a dustman's hat. He wears gold blimey trousers and he lives in the council flat. He looks a proper nonna in his great big high-heeled boots. He's got such a job to pull them up that he calls them daisy roots. Whoa.
Right? And you're able to transplant a very British novelty song that is there just to put a smile on the face of your recognition of the working class aspects that are in My Old Man's a Dustman, right? They can be transmitted through this American folk vernacular because it's the same thing basically. When rock and roll emerges, there's a real troublesome tension going on that we have British musicians aping black R&B groups and then black blues groups. We get the situation where the biggest band in the world is Led Zeppelin, and we have Robert Plant, you know, singing about the levee being broken, which of course cannot be what it was originally, which was a folk song recording some disaster that had happened in that community, that was in the DNA of that community. Levees breaking were not in the DNA of West Bromwich. What had happened is that this crossover of which I speak, that emerged in the 1950s in the United Kingdom, blessed that generation, and they became enthralled with this black American folk music, and they were able to see how it related to English folk music, and there's a direct relation. A lot of the actual song structures come from Scottish, Irish, English folk songs that went to America centuries before and then have come back. Right, it's the same thing. This is why it works together, right? This is why it works together. If you're a British musician doing folk music and you want to mix it with gamelan, that's going to be hard because it's like how did we get these? But these songs just work. These songs work. They're coming from the same place. Now, my premise on this video is the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Who and all those British bands that emerge, and then Hendrix comes over and we get Cream and Eric Clapton, and then we get Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd, and all this British rock music that then takes over the world, literally takes over the world, right? Is essentially unsuccessful. It's successful financially, and it's successful from a fine art point of view, but it's unsuccessful because at the time the critics decide that it's great art. The music world sees the sophistication of this, and it starts to turn through that application of theory into this very complex music. Can we bring classical excuse me, can we bring classical music in? Can we bring jazz in? Can we do this? Can we do tracks that are longer than 3 minutes? Can we start singing about love songs or driving around in cars, chatting up girls? All that starts to emerge. And by the time we get to the mid-70s, the establishment elites go, oh, we don't like this. This low art thing has turned into high art. I would like to see it return to low art, and we get the establishment of the artsy-fartsy visceral rock and roller. That's the big difference between Patti Smith and the Ramones to Little Richard and, Jerry Lee Lewis. There's a big difference of how those are perceived. We get splits within it. You get the musicians aspects. You get the high art against low art. You get a new realm of snobbery. I'm very aware that me being into jazz fusion and prog, that I represent a certain elitist, snobby aspect of rock and roll criticism, but is also against the mainstream idea that the visceral authenticity is more important than the rock and roll virtuosity, thus making people think that Lou Reed is a greater rocker than Black Sabbath when he's not. Right, and there's a dichotomy there. I've explored it on this channel. But this move to high art is almost like the beginning of the end. And that thing of which I speak in the 70s comes out of that. Rock and roll had become too sophisticated. It needed to be brought down a peg or two. In that scene in London, alongside the Jeff Becks and the Beatles and all those people, there's two musicians, Dave Peacock and Chas Hodges. And they're involved in this psychedelic post-blues thing. But the really thing is, they've come out of skiffle. And Chas Hodges is basically a boogie-woogie piano player in the style of Jerry Lee Lewis. And Dave Peacock is a guitarist who is adept at sort of English folk styles, but he's also can handle the banjo and get into all those American folk styles as well. The music that Chas and Dave decide to play is exactly the same as what the Beatles decide to play. Is taking American rhythm and blues and utilising the English history of folk music and musical and daft songs and all the novelty songs that are there. And those things stitched together. And Chas and Dave takes, this is incredible. And it really does go back to Lonnie Donegan. I think Lonnie Donegan had done it before, which is why he is also a great novelty artist, and yet possibly the most important British musician in the development of rock and roll there is. But the sublimation of this at the end of the 1960s is profound. So let me explain something that might be of interest to you. Chas Hodges and Dave Peacock are working as session musicians. They're not making Chas and Dave Cockney music. They're doing prog and rock. They're involved in some incredible bands at that time. They turn up to a session for Labi Siffre, who is a black homosexual songwriter in the 1970s, and in that is so groundbreaking. Labi Siffre was a real genius songwriter. They turn up to one of his sessions, that gets recorded, they come up with a really good groove. Years later, that groove will be sampled by Eminem for the tune, his first single, which went, "Ba-dam, my name is Ba-dam, my name is Ba-dam, my name is Slim Shady." I think it's called My Name Is, isn't it? And so you can see that what Chas Hodges and Dave Peacock was doing was so rooted in American rhythm and blues, black sort of funky soul, that Eminem was able to sample that and put it on a record that gave him access to the black world of hip hop in America. And what we have is it's not just a white guy rapping on there, that funky groove are white British people. It's just bonkers. But it's there because of the lineage that I've described. But Chas and Dave, they want to make, pop music that reflects their Britishness. And I believe way better than the Beatles, way better than, Led Zeppelin. They integrate an American sound, which really is coming from boogie-woogie piano playing through the sort of country aspect of rock and roll. People like Jerry Lee Lewis, they transplant that American form directly onto the sort of novelty folk songs that have been sung in the UK for centuries. And they marry so perfectly together that not only do they start having hit after hit, but what's incredible, that their lineup, which is basically the Count Basie lineup, it's not even a rock and roll, there's no guitars in there, it's bass, Dave Peacock's bass, the drummer, they got this bloke with the trilby hat on, and this bloke is the fattest, grooviest drummer you've ever heard, right? It's like listening to Bernard Purdie. This guy grooves. Fat, big bass lines, exploratory off Dave Peacock, and then Jazz on its incredible boogie-woogie piano playing. This is, if you take the vocals away, this is, for the want of a better term, black American folk music in every shape and form. It's all there, including music that's quite up to date, even bits of James Brown and, you know, bits of soul music, bits of Motown. It's all in there. There is nothing in the music that is English in Chaz and Dave. And yet those songs are so powerful that if you then go forward and you watch something like Only Fools and Horses, which is a sitcom, you hear with that theme music, the famous theme music, that style of, let's just call it Cockney music. It could almost be like Chaz and Dave did the theme to Only Fools and Horses, because they've created a style, Cockney music. Cockney music is entirely black American music, musically. That piano style, right? Now there's aspects of, say, Mrs. Mills in there, which was a popular pianist in the 1950s and 60s, but she was also drawing upon the novelty songs that are coming out of America. This is such a powerful thing in British music, right? Now, I want to try and explain this by going back to George Formby. George Formby is a superstar of music in the 1940s, even the 1930s. When you listen to George Formby playing his songs, the music he is playing is not European British music.
Now I go window cleaning to earn an honest bob. For a nosy Parker, it's an interesting job. Now it's a job that just suits me. A window cleaner you would be if you can see what I can see. When I'm cleaning windows, honeymooning couples too, you should see them bill and coo. You'd be surprised at things they do. When I'm cleaning windows, in my profession I'll work hard, but I'll never stop. I'll climb this blinking ladder till I get right to the top. The blushing bride, she looks divine. The bridegroom, he is doing fine. I'd rather have his job than mine. When I'm cleaning windows.
It's jazz. It's American jazz. And it's one of his songs. He actually shouts the term "Oh Lordy" in the same way as Ozzy Osbourne shouts the term "Oh Lordy" in his songs. This is the black spiritual coming through. Everything about George Formby's music is rooted in black American music. Now, I don't want to say this. You know, I'm a champion of British music, but you cannot realise how much it holds hands. And the area in which it holds hands is in the novelty, and continually all the way through our history in the United Kingdom, novelty songs have come out. Now, recently, I spotted this argument. There's a guy called Truth Saviour who's my nemesis when it comes to me saying that, you know, jazz is not black American music. I want to qualify here because there's a lot going on in this video. I will use the term black music with the same respect and meaning as he does. I will always do that. When I come to historical accuracy, however, I will point out that it's much more complex than that. But I have decided to use the term black with a capital B for the music that I'm talking about. And I think it's because we all know what that means, right? But this video is exposing a much deeper and much wider influence and how that's intrinsically linked in. And a lot of the sort of territorial arguments you're getting now, which is the sort of arse end of identity politics, when people say that belongs to us, or no, that belongs to that, no, that's yours, that's ours, and they're all fighting over it like a bunch of school kids that will eventually, well, the thing they're fighting over, they will rip to bits, right? And one of the arguments is like, who created rap? Where does rap come from? Well, it came out of the black community, goes back to the field hollers, and then you can hear elements in early jazz and early blues. The blues was like rap music. There was certain poetry that came out of the Harlem Renaissance. By the time you get to the 1960s, you've got the black poets, and the black poets are combining jazz, avant-garde jazz with black poetry that has a political dimension that serves across the civil rights movement. And then you get Gil Scott-Heron, but then there's a revolution in the 1970s where black communities who do not have access to guitar, bass and drums, but have parties with records, start to play records. They take two turntables, DJ Herc comes in, and he starts going back to back. The MCs who are talking, holding forth in the parties, start to rap over the top. Rap is a black term for just chatting, basically. And then you have this sort of sampled beats, and that goes into a whole. And this is the thing with hip hop that people don't understand. Hip hop is a world unto itself, and all the art forms are catered for. It's like the black community in America said, right, you've got fine art, we've got graffiti art. You've got the ballet, we've got break dancing. You've got prose and poetry, we've got the lyrics in rapping, especially freestyle rapping, right? And we have the jazz improvisation of classical music in the virtuosity of the rapping. And all those forms come together. And then, of course, African Bambaataa uses those forms to bring everyone together and unifies people. All this is the history of music, right? But I will say facetiously, well, no, the rap was invented by the British. What do you mean rap was invented by? It was invented by Noel Coward on the tune Mad Dogs and Englishmen. Right, we'll have a little bit of that now.
In tropical climes, there are certain times of day when all the citizens retired tear their clothes off and perspire. You know, it's one of those rules that the greatest fools obey because the sun is far too sultry and one must avoid the bob-rivalical rain. Pap like a pap like a pap like a boo, that's natives if you're interested. Digga-digga-digga-digga-digga-digga-doo. The natives grieve when the white men leave their huts because they're obviously, definitely nuts. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The Japanese don't care. The Chinese wouldn't dare to. Hindus and Argentines sleep firmly from 12 to 1, but Englishmen detest a siesta. You know, in the Philippines, they have lovely screens to protect you from the glare. In the Malay states, there are hats like plates, which the Britishers won't wear. At 12 noon, the natives swoon and no further work is done. But mad dogs and Englishmen go out to the midday sun.
Well, that's way before any black people were rapping. Okay, that's a novelty song. Rapping goes back to the musical. It's all in there. I'm not going to take hip hop and rapping away from the black Americans. I won't do that. It was entirely created by black Americans in America. And it's the bringing of those things together. All the elements are sort of there, but it was created entirely, hip hop was created entirely by black Americans, as was bebop. It's just that jazz wasn't. I'm not here to try and prove anything about white people doing anything. I'm just telling the truth so we can get a more accurate understanding of what the hell's happened. Right, so where are we? Yeah, the novelty song, okay? There's rap in that. And that lineage comes through into a lot of novelty songs. If you think of Benny Hill with his the Ernie, the fastest boot float in the West. What I'm starting to come up with here is a history of the British novelty song. Do you want to hear that one? Bernie Cribbins did one as well called Right Said Fred. Do you want a little bit of that?
Right said Fred, both of us together, one each end and steady as we go. Tried to shift it, couldn't even lift it, we was getting nowhere, and so we had a cup of tea, and right said Fred, give a shot for Charlie, up comes Charlie from the floor below. After straining, even and complaining, we was getting nowhere, and so we had a cup of tea, and Charlie had a think, and he thought we ought to take off all the handles, and the things what held the candles, but it did no good, well, I never thought it would all.
Cool, isn't it? Now, in the 1980s or early 90s, can't quite remember, we had a novelty group that did a brilliant song called I'm Too Sexy. What's these too sexy for? I'm too sexy for? I can't remember what it was too sexy for. And that band was called Right Said Fred, showing of incredible awareness and homage to an earlier novelty song maker in Bernard Cribbins. This history I want to nail. I am going to do the history of the British novelty song. And the thing is, that video will do well because anybody watches it will be entertained, because the British are incredible at novelty songs, because we can come up with stuff like this.
Can it change the laws of physics? Laws of physics, laws of physics. Can it change the laws of physics? Laws of physics, Jim.
Oh, we can indeed shoot to kill, shoot to kill, shoot to kill. We can indeed shoot to kill. Scotty, beam me up.
It's worse than that. He's dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. It's worse than that. He's dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. Dead.
Well, it's live, Jim, but not as we know it. Not as we know it. Not as we know it. It's live, Jim, but not as we know it. Not as we know it, Captain.
Swingers on the starboard bow, starboard bow, starboard bow. They're swingers on the starboard bow, starboard bow.
You cannot change the script, Jimmy. Up to you, Jimmy.
It's worse than that. It's physics, Jim.
Bridge to engine room, warp factor 9.
Oh, if I give it any more, she'll blow, Captain.
My name is Ethel the Frog, and I'm a frog, a frog, 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 frog. He's a frog, a little froggy, froggy frog. She likes to eat froggy. Do you wanna meet Ethel the Frog? Yeah. She's not a pig-head dog or a bug. Oh no. She doesn't live in a pond or a bog. She's not a friend with me. She's so lovely. Her skin is very warty, but she's never naughty. She's a frog, a little froggy, froggy frog. She likes to eat froggy. Do you wanna meet Ethel the Frog? Yeah. She's not a pig-head dog or a bug. Oh no. She doesn't live in a pond or a bog. She's not a friend with me. She's so lovely. Do you wanna meet Ethel the Frog? Yeah. She's not a pig-head dog or a bug. Oh no. She doesn't live in a pond or a bog. She's not a friend with me. She's so lovely. Do you wanna meet Ethel the Frog? Yeah. She's not a pig-head dog or a bug. Oh no. She doesn't live in a
And I love it. And in there is something so wonderful. So on this video, I've tried to explain what I said, the difference between high art and low art, how that relates to the idea of novelty, and how how Chaz and Dave are almost like Marcel Duchamp's urinal, because they create a music style with their thing, or refine it. I think Lonnie Donegan doing the video, I realised it's really just like Lonnie Donegan. They just go back to that. But they create a style of music that will never, ever get appreciated as being high art. Right? Now, I'm going to end you with a little bit of Chaz and Dave doing a song which I do think is high art, which I think is a brilliant piece of songwriting. And what the song's about is not just silliness about some wife talking too much. It explains something quite profound about human existence. I think the songwriting's really strong. I think it's a piece of high art, but it's hidden within the novelty. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, put a like on it. If you want to see some more like this, please subscribe. I have a Patreon as well. I have membership videos. This week I've been doing a lot of really special membership videos, and I think I'm starting to nail the realm of the membership videos. Basically, the membership videos and my Patreon videos, they need to be even more bonkers than what I'm doing here. If you really want to get into something that shouldn't ever exist in the public space, then become a member, because I'm going to be doing more of those. Last week I filmed a video called The Greatest Members Video on YouTube, and it is, go and watch it, right? It's insane. And conceptually what I'm dealing with that, you know, as if I don't want to blow sunshine up my own bottom, but I do. It's a very, very profound thing that's there. There's very profound things I do on this website. And I am able to do that because I'm an English man, and I can cover up the profundity in the same way Chaz and Dave did. And I can say things that are absolutely aesthetically perfect. Chaz and Dave, in terms of the embodiment of black American folk music like jazz, blues, rhythm, blues, boogie woogie, within an English aesthetic, this is the most successful. It's better than Oasis, it's better than the Spice Girls, it's better than the Beatles, it's better than them all. Chaz and Dave is the greatest British band of all time because they can do stuff like this.
Never cared about me, now I've seen the light. Oh darling, there ain't no pleasing you. You seem to think that everything I ever did was wrong. I should have known it all along. Oh darling, there ain't no pleasing you. What you wanna do, I'm telling you, 'cause I ain't gonna be made to look a fool no more. You've done it once too often, what do you take me for? Oh darling, there ain't no pleasing you. And you seem to think that everything I ever did was wrong. I should have known it all along, that darling, there ain't no pleasing you. You only had to say the word, and you knew I'd do it. You had me where you wanted me, but you went and blew. I ever done was only done for you, but now you can go and do just what you wanna do. I'm telling you, 'cause I ain't gonna be made to look a fool no more. You've done it once too often, what do you take me for? Oh darling, no pleasing you. Yeah, if you think I don't mean what I say, I'm only bluffing. You got another thing coming, I'm telling you.